Chapter 10. Eamon Goth wouldn't have his breakfast each day until he'd killed at least one Jew. He liked most to sit on the second-floor balcony of his house overlooking the camp and shoot Jews with a rifle while he listened to music on his record player. Didn't matter who you were, what you'd done. If you hurried through the parade grounds trying not to get shot, he would shoot at you on purpose. You had to walk through normally, acting like there wasn't a madman on the balcony above you with a rifle ready to shoot you, and hope he didn't notice you. The best way to not get shot was to not be there in the first place. I escaped the daily shooting gallery through my job at the tailor shop. I left early in the morning and returned in time for roll call, and then hard bread and thin soup in the barracks each night. Uncle Moshi did the same, working in a furrier shop outside the camp. There was still a chance Goth would get me at roll call. No one was safe, not even the capos. But with Moshi's help, I learned to be anonymous enough to survive for months. Then the tailor shop closed down. I was never sure why, but one morning when the other tailors and I assembled, we were told our services at the factory were no longer required. We looked around nervously at one another. Without our off-camp job, we would be around Eamon Goth all day, and without special skills, we were even less valuable than before. I was put to work building new barracks for the never-ceasing truckloads and trainloads of Jews brought to Plazow every day. It was back-breaking work, digging out a level patch of earth, hauling rocks in wheelbarrows, hammering boards in place, and always there was the threat of Eamon Goth and his dogs. After a man on my work detail was killed for moving too slowly, Uncle Moshi traded his daily rations to get to a capo to get me assigned to a new job outside the camp. I reported to my new work detail the next morning and was loaded into a truck, not knowing where we were going or what we were doing. None of us did. This was some new job no one had ever done before, and we were all a little nervous. There was always a chance that our work would be to dig graves in the woods and then be shot to fill them. The truck bounced to a stop and the Nazis ordered us out. But it wasn't the woods we had been taken to, or another factory. It was the Krakow ghetto. We looked at one another in wonder. Why had we been brought back to the ghetto? A guard at the gate on Lwowska Street let us through, and we saw right away what was different. There were no more people. No one was on the streets, and no one was in the houses. The whole ghetto had been liquidated after I'd left. There was no sign of life anywhere. The entire ghetto must be cleaned, one of the Nazis told us. There must be no taint of Jews left. We were told how to search each flat for anything of value and how to sort what was left into piles on the floor for removal and disposal. Clothes should be sorted in one way, household items in another. We were to take nothing out with us under penalty of death. As I walked the empty streets of Podgorze, my chest felt heavy. I was overwhelmed with memories. I hadn't been gone long, and the last few years I had lived here had been a nightmare. But what I remembered wasn't the snow shoveling and the shootings and the starvation. I remembered walking to the market with my mother, visiting my father at work, playing ball in the street with my friends. This neighborhood had been my home once, and it always would be, even after the taint of Jews had been scrubbed away. As if to tear my heart into even more pieces, I was assigned to clean out the apartment building where I had lived with my parents. While other boys worked the bottom floor, I climbed the stairs. I stopped and stood where no one could see me, remembering. Mr. Barchwick on the second floor singing along with the radio, Mrs. Szymanski sweeping the third-floor landing. Any minute now, I thought, my mother's voice would come calling down the stairs. "Yannick, dinner!" I waited. But there was no radio, no sweeping, no call from my mother. Nothing but the quiet shuffling of the boys working the flats on the first floor. I climbed the stairs to my old floor and crept down the hall. This corridor had once been so familiar to me that I had traveled it even without ever really seeing it. But now it was different. Now I could see the worn spots in the hall rugs, the broken piece of molding along the ceiling, the burned-out bulb in the light fixture. There was a new smell, too, something putrid like nothing I had ever smelled before. It was strongest near the door to Mr. Tatarka's flat. The door was ajar, and I pushed it open the rest of the way to look inside. Mr. Tatarka lay in the middle of the front room of his apartment beside the chair he had stolen from the Immerglicks, dead in a pool of his own blood. At least I thought it was Mr. Tatarka. The body was black and shriveled, all rags and bones, and I stumbled back into the hall and retched. The smell, the sight of it was all just too much. I threw up again, tears streaming from my burning eyes, and I ran. I ran not for my old flat, the one we had shared with 3 other families. I ran instead for the roof, where it had just been me and my mother and father, safe and alone in our little pigeon coop. I burst through the big metal door and out onto the rooftop, gulping in big lungfuls of fresh air. The smell eventually went away, but not the memory of it, nor the vision of Mr. Tatarka's decomposing body. I stood with my hands on my knees for a while until my breathing returned to normal, but I knew I'd have to get back soon. It wouldn't do for the Nazis to notice me for any reason. I went into the pigeon coop, fighting back all the memories of my mother and father. I sifted through what was left. Someone else had lived here after I had been taken. There was a tattered scarf I didn't remember and a red blanket that hadn't been mine. But my father's old coat was still there in the corner. I knew I couldn't take it with me, but I picked it up and put it on, more to remember the smell of him more than anything. It fit me better than it ever had, and I realized suddenly that even though I was thin and starving, I had still grown. I was 14 now, and almost as tall as my father had been. I was pulling the coat off when I felt a lump in one of the sleeves. I felt it with my fingers. Something was sewn into the sleeve. Of course! Mother had sewn our extra money into our coats so it couldn't be stolen in a raid. I glanced outside the coop to make sure that no one else had made it to the roof yet, and I hastily ripped the seams of my father's coat apart. There were 1,000 zloty inside. I dug through the pile of things, found my old coat as well, and ripped out the seams. Another 1,000 zloty. 2,000 zloty. The Nazis didn't sell food in the labor camp, of course, but there were ways to buy food smuggled in from the outside. Uncle Mashi would know how. Using a needle and thread of my mother's that had been left behind, I tore out one of the seams in my prisoner coat and sewed the money inside. I knew how to sew beautifully now from my work in the tailor shop. I finished quickly and was pleased with my work. Only the closest examination would find the money hidden inside. I hurried to put the rest of the few things in the pigeon coop into piles, in case someone did come up here to clean up, and went back down to find the boys from my work detail. They had already made it to the top floor, and I joined in with the group, cleaning out my family's old flat, carefully avoiding Mr. Tatarka's apartment. We worked the rest of the day, putting clothes in one pile, household goods in another. I always went for the clothes first, running my hands along the seams to see if anyone else had had the same idea as my mother, and once found a pair of diamond earrings. I hooked them inside my jacket under my arms and hoped they wouldn't fall out. Uncle Mashi and I were going to eat well tonight. All the way back to the camp, I worried I would be discovered, but the guards either didn't think we would try to sneak anything back in or figured there wasn't anything left of value in the ghetto to smuggle. For the most part, they were right. More than just the people had been taken from the ghetto. 2 years of imprisonment and starvation and raids had bled the ghetto dry of almost anything worth owning. As we assembled for roll call, I whispered for Uncle Mashi to come to my barracks after dinner, or at dinner. I also asked him what the score was. Goth 19, Jews 0, he whispered back. It was a good day to get you out of the camp. I nodded. A very good day indeed.